I thought I had a perfect husband until I heard the muffled moans coming from the bathroom. Behind the locked door, he turned our baby into a victim of his silent rage. When I saw the purple marks, I realized the monster was using bath time to hide his crimes. Hello, my dear friends. How wonderful it is to chat with you today. I'm Eleanor Morgan, 73 years young, and I live in my cozy little home in Lexington, Kentucky. Life has taught me many things, some good, others I wish I'd never had to learn, but all have shaped me into who I am today. Every morning I wake up and brew a cup of coffee, you know? It's a ritual I've maintained for over 50 years. I heat the water just right, not too hot or it gets bitter, then prepare it carefully, just like my grandmother Abigail taught me. I sit on my front porch facing the garden I planted with my own hands and watch the birds visit my flowers. It's a moment of peace I've earned after weathering many storms in life. I started this routine when my grandchildren were small. It was a way to create special moments when they came to visit. My oldest grandson, Tyler, who's 17 now, loved waking up early with me to watch the sunrise while I prepared my coffee. And Laura, my sweet granddaughter who's 15, always wanted to learn how I made it, even when she was tiny. Those children were like a light illuminating my path when I thought I'd live forever in the shadows. Before them, I rarely left the house and barely spoke to anyone. But those children brought back something I'd lost long ago: hope. It was for them that I began taking care of myself again, planting my flowers and making my daily coffee as a celebration of the life that continued despite everything. And you, my dear viewers watching now, tell me in the comments, what town are you watching from? And what time of day did you find this video? With morning coffee, after lunch, or at night before bed? I always read all the comments and feel so happy knowing where you're from and when you take time from your day to listen to this grandma's stories. Let me know, okay? Let's create a chain of kindness. Today, I'm going to share a very painful story, but one that needs to be told. Because sometimes evil hides behind smiles and sweet words. Sometimes the one who seems to be Prince Charming hides a monster behind the mask. And I took far too long to see it. It almost cost me what I held most precious. I'll tell you how I discovered that my husband, whom everyone thought was perfect, was hiding a terrible secret behind the bathroom door. This is a story about sometimes needing courage to see the truth right in front of our eyes. About how love can blind us, but also give us the strength we need when the time comes to protect those we love. Make yourselves comfortable, my friends, because this is a story that needs to be heard. I was born in Springfield, a small town near Lexington. It was 1952, America was living in a different time, but in our house things were always difficult, regardless of what was happening in the rest of the country. My father, Theodore Morgan, worked as a shoemaker. He had strong, calloused hands, but a heart as soft as velvet. My mother, Geneva, was a seamstress and embroiderer, one of the finest. She made breathtaking dresses, especially for young women getting married. We were 4 siblings: me, the youngest, Samuel, the oldest, Albert, the middle child, and Charles, who came just before me. Our house was small, made of wood, with a roof that always leaked when it rained hard. It had a hallway cutting through the middle, 3 small bedrooms, a living room that also served as my father's workshop, and a kitchen with a wood stove that heated the entire house during Kentucky's cold winters. The bathroom was out back, a wooden outhouse we were afraid to visit at night. In the yard, my mother kept a vegetable garden and some chickens, which helped put food on the table when money was scarce. Life was simple, but it had its joys. Every Sunday we went to the Baptist church, and afterward my father would take us for ice cream in the square when there was a little extra money. I loved Sundays for that reason, and also because it was the only day we could play without many responsibilities. During the week, we'd wake up with the roosters crow, have coffee with milk and homemade bread with apple preserves my mother made, and then help with chores before going to school. I would sweep the yard, feed the chickens, and help hang laundry. After school, I helped my mother with simple embroidery. It was she who taught me to sew and crochet, skills that bring me such comfort today. At school, I was studious. I loved to read and write, and always brought home books that Miss Harriet loaned me to finish reading. My father said I had a good head for learning, but in those days, for a girl from a humble family, studying beyond elementary school was almost impossible. Even so, I dreamed of being a teacher someday. Among my siblings, Charles was always the most determined. From an early age, he had a serious manner and always said he'd be a police officer when he grew up. He and Samuel were very close, always making plans together. Albert was the quietest, always seeming to be thinking about something important. And I, as the baby of the family, was somewhat spoiled by everyone, especially by my father. The games of my childhood were simple: jacks, jump rope, hide and seek with the neighborhood children. My best friend was Zelda, daughter of Mrs. Geraldine, who lived 3 houses down from ours. We played with cornhusk dolls and made mud pies in her backyard. But not everything was rosy in my childhood. Poverty was a constant companion, and so were difficulties. I remember once we ate nothing but cornmeal mush with milk for nearly a week because my father got sick and couldn't work. And there was Uncle Julian, my mother's brother, who came to visit occasionally. He drank too much, and when he drank, he got a look that frightened me. My father didn't like it when he showed up, but my mother said it was her duty to help her brother. It was during one of Uncle Julian's visits that I had my first encounter with real fear. I was about 8 years old. I was alone at home, helping my mother prepare lunch when he arrived. My mother had to go out to buy something we were missing and asked me to keep stirring the beans on the stove. As soon as she left, Uncle Julian came into the kitchen. He looked at me strangely, called me his little doll, and wanted me to sit on his lap. Something inside me said that wasn't right. Thank God, at that moment, Charles came home from school. When he entered, my uncle completely changed his behavior, went back to the living room, and pretended to be asleep. That night, I told Charles what had happened. He was only 12, but he looked at me with the seriousness of a grown-up and said, "Don't worry, Eleanor. I'll protect you. No one's going to hurt you." And wouldn't you know it, he kept his promise. The next day, I don't know what happened, but Uncle Julian left very early, and he never appeared at our house again when I was alone. That's when a special bond was born between Charles and me. He became my protector, my hero. Whenever I had a problem, it was to him that I ran. When the girls at school teased me about my patched clothes, it was he who consoled me and said that one day everything would be different. And when I was afraid of something, I just had to think, Charles wouldn't let that happen. As we grew up, Charles kept his promise to protect me. He studied hard, managed to join the police force, and rose through the ranks over time. Always serious, always upright, always fair. He became a man who commanded respect just by entering a room. And I felt safe knowing I had a brother like that. Samuel followed the path of carpentry, learned the trade from a neighbor, and set up a small workshop. Albert went to work in a factory in Louisville and moved there. I continued helping my mother with sewing and embroidery, always dreaming of a different life, but not knowing how to achieve it. When I turned 12, my mother began teaching me all the secrets of being a good housewife: how to make rice that wasn't soggy, how to remove difficult stains from clothes, how to darn socks. "A woman needs to know how to care for home and family," she would say. "It's our mission in this life." I learned everything properly, but deep in my heart, I wanted something more. I wanted to study, wanted to know the world beyond Springfield, wanted to be as free as the birds I saw flying over the roof of our house. Little did I know that life still had many surprises in store for me, some sweet, others bitter as gall, and that Charles's promise of protection would be so important many years later, in a moment when I would need it most. At 18 in 1970, I finally got a job at a fabric store in downtown Springfield. It was my first step toward having a little independence. I didn't earn much, but it was enough to help at home and save a little for myself. My mother didn't much like me working outside the home. She thought a young, unmarried woman should stay home, but my father supported me. Let the girl breathe a little, he said. And so it was. At the store, I helped customers, organized the fabrics, and sometimes even gave advice on which material was best for each type of clothing. The knowledge I learned from my mother helped me a lot. The store owner, Mrs. Ethel, was a widow who treated me almost like a daughter. She encouraged me to take a sewing and pattern-making course to improve what I already knew. It was working there that I met Richard. He came into the store late one afternoon, wanting to buy fabric for curtains. He said he had just moved into a small apartment and wanted to make it cozier. At the time, I found that so different, a man concerned about curtains. Most men I knew didn't even know the color of the curtains in their own homes. Richard was different in every way. He spoke softly, had polite manners, and a smile that seemed to light up the room. He always dressed very well, even though he was just a simple bank employee in town. He returned to the store several times, always with some excuse to buy something. Until one day, he invited me for coffee after work. I remember our first date as if it were yesterday. I was so nervous that I spilled coffee on my new blouse. Instead of laughing at me, as other men might have done, Richard took his handkerchief from his pocket and helped me clean it, with all the care not to embarrass me. That's when I was completely charmed. We started dating, always very respectfully. Richard made a point of coming to my house, talked politics and football with my father, brought simple gifts for my mother. Everyone liked him, except Charles. My brother, who was already a police officer at the time, looked at Richard with suspicion. "There's something about him that doesn't smell right, Eleanor," he told me once. "Nobody's that perfect." But I was in love, and thought Charles was just being an overprotective, jealous brother. "You'll always think no one is good enough for me," I replied, part joking, part annoyed. The courtship lasted 2 years. Richard treated me like a princess. He never raised his voice, never had a rough gesture, never pressured me for anything. When he asked for my hand in marriage, my father didn't hesitate to give his blessing. The only condition he imposed was that we lived nearby, so I could continue helping my mother, who was already beginning to suffer from health problems. Our wedding was simple, but beautiful. I married in a dress I sewed myself, under my mother's supervision. The celebration was in the backyard of my parents' home, with a barbecue made by my father and Samuel. Charles attended, of course, but maintained a serious expression the entire time. When he hugged me, he whispered in my ear, "Anything at all, you know where to find me." At the time, I thought that was an exaggeration. Richard was the gentlest man I had ever met. Everyone commented on how lucky I was. "He'll never make you suffer," my mother said. "A man like that is 1 in 1,000, the neighbors remarked. In the first months of marriage, we lived in a small rented house not far from my parents' home, as my father had requested. Richard continued working at the bank, and I at the fabric store. He didn't want me to work, said he could support us alone, but I insisted. I liked my independence, small as it was. Our life was peaceful. Richard never came home late, didn't drink beyond a beer on the weekend, didn't gamble, didn't give me any cause for complaint. When we went out together, he always made a point of introducing me to his colleagues with pride. "This is my wife, Eleanor," he would say with a smile. The only thing that bothered me, even if slightly, was how he changed when my brother Charles was present. Richard became tense, spoke even more quietly than normal, and seemed to measure every word. I attributed this to the fact that Charles was already feared by many in town. As part of the police force, he had a reputation for being tough, for not letting anyone off the hook. I even found it funny how Richard got nervous, interpreting it as a good impression he wanted to make. At 24, after almost 4 years of marriage, I became pregnant. It was 1976, a time of immense joy. Richard seemed the happiest man in the world. He bought a crib before we even knew the baby's sex, started saving money to buy our own house, and wouldn't let me carry even a grocery bag. "Now you need to take care of yourself twice as much," he would say. The pregnancy went well. I left my job at the store in the 7th month, when my belly was already quite large, and prepared to be a mother. My mother and neighbors filled me with advice, and I absorbed it all, anxious and happy. Our son was born on a cold July morning in 1976. A strong boy with his father's eyes and, according to my mother, the Morgan family nose. We decided to name him Benjamin in honor of Richard's grandfather, whom he always spoke of fondly. It was after Benjamin's birth that things began to change, even if so subtly that it took me a while to notice. Richard insisted that, since I was tired from caring for the baby during the day, he would take over the evening bath. "It's my contribution," he would say. "You already do so much during the day. Let me handle this time." At first I found that so sweet. Such a present father, so willing to help, was rare at that time. All my friends envied the husband I had. "Richard is a saint," they would say. But after a few weeks, I began to notice something strange. The baths lasted a very long time. At first, I thought it was because Richard was careful, wanted to do everything just right. But an hour, 2 hours, sometimes even longer. It was a very long time for a simple baby bath. When I asked why it took so long, he always had an explanation. Benjamin was agitated, I had to calm him down. Or, I took the opportunity to give him a massage, it's good for his development. I accepted it, of course. Richard was such a good father, so attentive. Except gradually, I noticed other changes. Benjamin, who was a calm, smiley baby, began to get more irritable. He cried a lot, especially when his father approached him for the bath. At the time, I thought it was colic, or some developmental phase. All the mothers told me it was normal. Babies go through phases. One night, while Richard was bathing Benjamin, I approached the bathroom door. It was closed, as always. I put my ear to it and heard something that froze my blood. It wasn't the lullabies that Richard said he sang to the baby. They were low moans, which seemed to come from Richard, and a muffled cry from Benjamin, as if he were in pain. I knocked on the door immediately. "Is everything all right in there?" I asked, with my heart racing. The answer came too quickly. "All fine. Benjamin got water in his eye, but it's better now." When they came out of the bathroom, Richard brought Benjamin wrapped in a towel. The baby was quiet, with reddened eyes. "See? He's fine now," said Richard, passing the baby to me. "I'll prepare the bottle while you dress him." That night, when I put Benjamin's pajamas on, I noticed something I hadn't seen before. Small reddish marks on his back and arms. They looked like finger marks, as if someone had squeezed hard. When Richard returned with the bottle, I asked about the marks. Without hesitating, he replied, "Oh, that. He bumped himself in the tub. You know how clumsy babies are." I wanted to believe him. I swear I did. Richard was a good husband, an attentive father. Everyone said so. I said so myself. He had never given me any reason to doubt. He had never treated me badly, had never raised his voice to me. But something didn't fit. The marks looked like fingers, not bumps on the tub. Benjamin's crying during the bath was different. It seemed like pain, not fussing. And mainly, why did Richard insist on locking the door? That night I didn't sleep well. I lay looking at my baby in the crib next to the bed, watching his peaceful little face as he slept, and an anguish began to grow inside me. What if Richard wasn't who I thought he was? What if, behind that mask of perfect husband, there was something dark? The next day, when Richard went to work, I took Benjamin and went to visit my brother Charles. He was already a sergeant on the police force by then, and lived alone in a small apartment downtown. "I need to tell you something," I said, as soon as I entered. "But I think you'll think I'm crazy." Seated in Charles's apartment living room with Benjamin in my arms, I told everything that had been happening. The long bath hours, the strange crying, the marks I had found. As I spoke, tears ran down my face, and my voice trembled. It was as if, by saying those words aloud, I finally admitted to myself the terrible possibility I had been trying to deny. Charles listened to me in silence, his face becoming more and more closed. When I finished, he asked to see the marks on Benjamin. Carefully, I took off the baby's clothes and showed the small purple spots that were still visible on his back and arms. "Eleanor," he said after a long silence, "I never trusted Richard. I always thought there was something wrong with him, but I never imagined he was capable of this." "Maybe we're mistaken," I said, still trying to find an explanation that wouldn't destroy my world. "Maybe it's just—" "Don't deceive yourself," Charles interrupted me, with a firmness that only increased my fear. "These aren't accident marks. They're marks of mistreatment. Believe me, I've seen cases like this before." He wanted me not to go back home, to stay with our parents until he resolved the situation. But I was confused, afraid. Part of me still wanted to believe in Richard, the man who had been so perfect for all those years. And I also feared what Charles might do. My brother had an inflexible sense of justice and an anger that once awakened was difficult to control. "Give me some time," I asked. "I need to be sure before making any accusations." Charles didn't like it, but agreed with one condition. "If you notice anything at all, let me know immediately. And don't leave Benjamin alone with Richard." I returned home with a feeling of heaviness in my chest. How could I prevent Richard from bathing the baby without raising suspicions? How could I observe without being noticed? And mainly, how could I deal with the possibility that the man I loved might be hurting our son? That night, when Richard arrived from work, he seemed the same as always. He kissed me on the forehead, asked how my day had been, played a little with Benjamin. It was difficult to look at that gentle man and imagine he could harm a defenseless child. Our son. "I'll give Benjamin his bath," he said, as every night. "I'd like to give it today," I replied, trying to keep my voice casual. I miss this moment with him. I saw something pass across Richard's face like a fleeting shadow. It wasn't disappointment or annoyance. It was something else, something I had never seen before. "But I always give him his bath at night," he insisted, his voice still soft, but with a new firmness. "It's our father-son moment." "I know, but today I want to participate." "We can bathe him together," I suggested, feeling my heart beat strongly against my chest. Richard hesitated for a moment and then agreed, with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Of course, let's do it together then." The bath that night was quick and without incident. Richard was gentle with Benjamin, hummed to him, did everything with a care that seemed genuine. The baby, however, still cried when his father touched him, something Richard attributed to a phase. During the following weeks, I insisted on participating in the bath every night. Richard didn't like it. It was visible, but he didn't openly oppose it. He just said things like, "You should rest," or "I thought you were enjoying your free time at night." The marks on Benjamin's body began to disappear, and I almost convinced myself I had imagined everything. Almost. Because there were moments, brief instants, when I caught Richard looking at Benjamin in a different way. It wasn't the look of love a father has for a son. It was something cold, distant, as if he were looking at an object, not a person. And there were other small things. The way Richard got irritated when the baby cried during the night, even though he never openly showed that irritation. The manner in which he sometimes held Benjamin with unnecessary firmness. The way his voice changed, becoming harsher, when he was alone with me and the baby, without the presence of other people. One day, when Richard was at work, I received a visit from my neighbor, Mrs. Irene. She was an elderly lady who lived alone in the house next door and had always been very kind to me, helping with tips about the baby. "Eleanor, dear," she said, after a bit of trivial conversation, "excuse the intrusion, but is everything all right with you all?" I felt my face heat up. "Yes, why do you ask?" She hesitated, twisting the dishcloth she carried in her hands. "It's just that sometimes, When your husband was bathing the baby, I heard very strong crying. Cries of pain, you know? And once, through my bathroom window, I saw when he came out with the little one in his arms, and the boy seemed drained, as if he were exhausted from crying so much. I felt the blood freeze in my veins. When was this? A few weeks ago. Before you started giving the bath together with him. The confirmation that someone else had also noticed something wrong was like a slap in the face. It wasn't my imagination. It wasn't paranoia of a first-time mother. It was real. That night, when Richard arrived, I was different. I couldn't look at him the same way anymore. Every gesture, every word, every smile, everything seemed false now. A perfect mask hiding something dark underneath. When bath time came, I said I had a headache and that he could go alone. I wanted to see what he would do, if he would insist that I participate now that he had gotten used to my presence. But to my surprise, Richard seemed almost relieved. "All right, you rest," he said, picking up Benjamin. "I'll take care of everything." As soon as the bathroom door closed, I ran to our bedroom. Weeks before, I had bought a small battery-powered radio to listen to music while I nursed during the night. The device had a feature that my brother Samuel had shown me. If you tuned to the right frequency between two stations, you could pick up sounds from the house, like an improvised intercom. I turned on the radio, adjusted to the frequency I thought would work best, and put my ear near the device. At first, there was only static, then the sound of running water, and then Richard's voice. But it wasn't the soft, gentle voice I knew. It was a low, angry voice, charged with an emotion I had never heard in him before. "Why can't you stay quiet? Why do you have to be so difficult, so annoying?" Each word was like a knife stab. I heard Benjamin's cry, a cry of pain that broke my heart. And then, the unmistakable sound of a slap, and another, and the words became even crueler. "You little crybaby, just like your mother, weak, pathetic." I felt my legs weaken. I had to sit on the bed to avoid falling. The tears ran down my face, and I had to put my hand over my mouth to keep from screaming. That wasn't the Richard I knew. That wasn't the gentle man I had married. It was a monster. The bath continued for a few more minutes, with Richard alternating between moments of contained rage and a false sweetness that now sounded even more disturbing. When I heard the water being drained, I quickly turned off the radio and hid it under the pillow. I wiped away the tears, took a deep breath, and tried to compose myself. I couldn't confront him now. Not when he was with Benjamin, not when I didn't have a plan. I needed to think, I needed to protect myself, and mainly, protect my son. Richard entered the bedroom with Benjamin in his arms, wrapped in a towel. The baby was quiet, with red eyes, exactly as the neighbor had described, exhausted from crying so much. "He's almost asleep," Richard said, with that soft voice that now sounded like a terrible lie. "I'll put him in the crib." I watched as he dressed Benjamin in his pajamas and put him to bed. His gestures were careful, measured. No one who saw him at that moment could imagine the cruelty I had just heard. When Richard left the room to put away the bath things, I approached the crib. Carefully, I examined my son's little body. There were new marks. Small, almost imperceptible if you weren't looking for them. Finger marks on his little arms, a red spot on his back. At that moment, something inside me died. Any doubt, any hope that I was mistaken, any love I still felt for Richard, everything was replaced by a cold certainty and a fierce determination. My son was being mistreated by his own father, and I would not allow it to continue. But I couldn't simply take Benjamin and run. Richard would find me, and what would happen then? I couldn't confront him directly, not without being sure that we would be protected. And I couldn't ask my parents for help. My mother was sick, and my father, despite being strong for his age, would be no match for Richard, who was younger and, as I now knew, capable of violence. There was only one person I could fully trust. One person who had promised to protect me. My brother Charles, That night, I pretended to sleep next to Richard, feeling my body stiffen every time he turned in the bed. The next morning couldn't come quickly enough. As soon as it dawned, I said I was going to visit my mother. Richard didn't question it. I did this regularly. Instead of going to my parents' house, however, I went straight to Charles's apartment. He wasn't there. He had already left for work. I left a simple note. "You were right. I need your help. I'll be at Mom's house." I spent the day at my parents' house, trying to act normally. My mother noticed I was different, quieter, more tense, but attributed it to the tiredness of caring for a small baby. "It's like this in the first few months, daughter," she said. "It will pass." If she only knew what was really happening. But I couldn't tell her. Not yet. Not until I had a concrete plan. Charles appeared in the late afternoon. From his expression when he arrived, I knew he had received my note. He asked to speak with me alone, and we went to the boys' old room, which now served as a pantry. "What happened?" he asked as soon as we closed the door. I told him everything. The radio, the cruel words, the new marks. As I spoke, I saw my brother's face transform. The anger was palpable, like a storm about to explode. "I'm going to end him," Charles said through his teeth. "No," I replied, holding his arm. "I need you as a brother, not in jail for assault. I need help to get out of this situation safely." Charles took a deep breath, trying to control himself. "You're right. We need to be smart. Do you have any proof?" "Just what I heard, and the marks on Benjamin. But the marks are small. Could be from anything." "It's not enough," he said, thoughtful. "Richard has a perfect image in the community. No one would believe without concrete proof." That's when I had the idea. A risky idea, which would make my stomach turn just thinking about it, but which might be our only chance. What if I could get proof? Proof that no one could deny? "What kind of proof are you thinking of?" Charles asked, his eyes fixed on mine. "I need to see with my own eyes what happens in that bathroom," I replied, feeling a shiver run down my spine. "And I need other people to see it too." I explained my plan. Samuel, our oldest brother who worked with carpentry, had recently acquired a novelty. A small camera he used to record his work and show to clients. It was expensive equipment that he had bought with great sacrifice, but which was helping his business grow. If I can get that camera from Samuel, I can hide it in the bathroom before bath time. That way we'll have concrete proof of what Richard does. Charles was silent for a moment, considering the idea. "It's risky. If Richard discovers the camera..." He didn't need to complete the sentence. We both knew what would happen if Richard discovered he was being filmed. His anger, which until then had only been directed at Benjamin, could turn toward me. "It's a risk I need to take," I said, with a determination I didn't know I possessed. "I can't continue living like this, pretending not to know what's happening to my son." We agreed that I would return home as if nothing had happened. The next day, Charles would talk to Samuel and get the camera. Then he himself would install it at a time when Richard was at work. "Just one more night," he said, squeezing my hand. "Hold on, just one more night." I returned home before Richard arrived from work. I prepared dinner, took care of Benjamin, and tried to act normally when he arrived. It was the most difficult night of my life. Every time Richard touched the baby, I felt like screaming, like tearing my son from his arms. But I had to keep calm, had to pretend nothing had changed. At bath time, I said I was very tired, that it had been a difficult day with Benjamin. Richard didn't insist that I participate. On the contrary, he seemed almost relieved. "You rest," he said, picking up the baby. "I'll take care of him." When the bathroom door closed, I turned on the radio again. The same sounds, the same cruel words, the same cry of pain from my son. Each second was torture. I had to control myself not to invade the bathroom and snatch my son from the arms of that man. After Richard put Benjamin to sleep and joined me in the living room, I turned on the television and pretended to watch the program. He sat next to me, put his arm around my shoulders, and commented on his day at the bank. As if it were any night, as if he hadn't just mistreated our son. That night, I made up an excuse to sleep in Benjamin's room. I said he was more agitated, that I thought he might be getting sick, and I wanted to keep an eye on him. Richard didn't question it. "You're a great mother," he said, kissing my forehead. Those words, which should have been a compliment, sounded like an accusation. If I were really a good mother, I would have noticed before what was happening. I spent the night in a chair next to the crib, watching my son sleep. His little face still showed signs of intense crying, but now he was tranquil. I silently promised him that nothing bad would happen to him again, that I would protect him with my own life if necessary. The next morning, Richard left for work as always. As soon as he departed, Charles appeared with Samuel. My oldest brother didn't know exactly why we needed the camera, but Charles had said it was a family emergency, and that was enough. "Just be careful with it. It's my livelihood," Samuel said, handing over the equipment. "And if you need anything else, just ask." Charles and I went to the bathroom. He examined the environment, looking for the best place to hide the camera. Finally, he decided on a small cabinet in the corner where the towels were kept. He made a small hole in the door, almost imperceptible, and positioned the camera so that it captured the entire bathtub area. "Let's test it," he said, turning on the equipment. We closed the cabinet door and left the bathroom. Charles went to the room where the camera monitor was and confirmed that everything was working perfectly. "Now we need a plan for when we have the recording," he said. "We can't simply confront Richard with this. He might destroy the evidence. He might become violent." We agreed that, as soon as we had the recording, I would take Benjamin and go directly to the police station where Charles worked. There, he would be waiting with other trusted officers. Richard would be called to appear under some pretext and would be confronted with the evidence. Charles made it clear that he could not be at home that night. "If I see with my own eyes what he does, I won't be able to control myself," he admitted. "And we need to do this the right way, by the law." I agreed. My brother left, promising to be at the station at night, waiting for me. Samuel also said goodbye, still not completely understanding what was happening, but trusting us. I stayed alone with Benjamin, the hidden camera, and the longest wait of my life. Each minute seemed like an hour. I tried to occupy myself with household chores, tried to play with Benjamin, tried to do anything not to look at the clock every 5 minutes. When Richard finally arrived from work, my heart was beating so hard that I was afraid he might hear it. I greeted him as always. We served dinner, talked about trivial matters. Me, pretending to be the same wife as always. He, pretending to be the same gentle husband as always. 2 actors in a macabre play. Bath time arrived, and I said I had a headache. Richard took Benjamin and went to the bathroom. As soon as I heard the door close, I ran to the room where the camera monitor was. I turned it on, adjusted the volume, and prepared for what I was about to watch. At first, everything seemed normal. Richard undressed Benjamin carefully, tested the water temperature, placed him gently in the tub. He talked to him, smiled. Anyone who saw only this part would think he was an exemplary father. But then, Benjamin splashed water, an involuntary gesture of a baby. And I saw the change. Richard's face transformed. The smile disappeared, replaced by an expression I had never seen before. It was as if another person had taken my husband's place. "Don't do that," he said, his voice low and controlled, but charged with an anger that made me shudder. "How many times do I have to tell you not to do that?" Benjamin, of course, didn't understand. He was just a baby of a few months. He stirred in the water, spreading a few more drops, and that's when it happened. Richard grabbed his little arms with too much force, leaving instant marks on the delicate skin. He shook him, not violently as in the movies, but with enough force to frighten the baby, to hurt him. All the time, speaking through his teeth cruel words I would never have imagined hearing from him. "You do it on purpose, don't you? Just to irritate me, just like your mother, always testing me, always challenging me. My hand flew to my mouth, stifling a scream. It was worse than I had imagined. It wasn't just momentary frustration. It wasn't just inexperience with babies. It was calculated anger. It was deliberate cruelty. Benjamin began to cry, a cry of pain and fear that broke my heart into 1,000 pieces. And that only seemed to irritate Richard even more. "Shut up," he hissed, squeezing the baby's arm with even more force. "Shut up, or it will be worse." It was the most difficult moment of my life. Every maternal instinct screamed for me to run there, snatch my son from those cruel hands, scream, fight, do anything to protect him. But I knew I needed the complete recording. I needed irrefutable proof. So I stayed there, watching my son being mistreated, feeling each of his tears like a knife in my own chest, silently promising that it would be the last time, that he would never again suffer at his father's hands. The bath continued for a few more minutes, with Richard alternating between moments of anger and periods of false tenderness, as if he were rehearsing for when someone might be watching. Finally, he took Benjamin out of the water, wrapped him in a towel, and left the bathroom. I quickly turned off the monitor and ran to our bedroom, pretending to be lying down with a headache. I heard Richard enter the baby's room, dress him in his pajamas, and put him in the crib. Then he came to our bedroom. "Benjamin is already asleep," he said. "How's your head?" "A little better," I replied, trying to control the tremor in my voice. "I think I'll take a hot shower. It might help." Richard agreed and returned to the living room, turning on the television. I took the opportunity to go to the bathroom, not to shower, but to retrieve the camera. With trembling hands, I opened the small cabinet, took the equipment, and hid it in my purse. I returned to the bedroom, dressed as if for sleep, and waited. I needed Richard to be completely distracted before making my next move. After about an hour, when I was sure he was absorbed in the television program, I went to Benjamin's room. With as much silence as possible, I took the sleeping baby, some clothes, the bag with the camera, and headed to the back door. My heart was beating so hard that I thought I might faint. Each step seemed like an eternity. Each creak of the floorboard sounded like thunder in my ears. But finally, I managed to leave the house without being noticed. The cool night air hit me like a blessing. I placed Benjamin in the stroller that I had prepared earlier and left in the yard, and began to walk as fast as I could without running, so as not to attract attention. The streets of Springfield were almost deserted at that hour. I walked toward downtown, where the police station was. It was a walk of about 20 minutes, but that night it seemed like an endless journey. At each corner, each shadow, I imagined Richard appearing, discovering my escape. What would he do? Would he be capable of hurting me too? Of hurting Benjamin even more? These thoughts gave me energy to walk faster, to quicken my pace even when my legs began to ache. Finally, I sighted the police station building. The lights were on, and I could see movement inside. Charles was there, waiting for me, as he had promised. The sight of that place, which represented safety and justice, made tears of relief begin to stream down my face. I pushed the door with one hand, holding Benjamin's stroller with the other, and entered. The receptionist officer looked at me with surprise. It probably wasn't common for a woman to enter there late at night with a sleeping baby and tears on her face. "I need to speak with Sergeant Charles," I said, my voice choked. "I'm his sister." The officer nodded and got up to call my brother. While I waited, I looked at Benjamin, still sleeping peacefully. "It's over," I whispered to him. "Mommy won't let anyone hurt you again." Charles appeared next, his face tense with concern. Seeing me, his body seemed to relax a bit. "You made it," he said, not as a question, but as a statement. I nodded, taking the camera from my purse. "It's all here, every second." He took the camera carefully, as if it were the most precious evidence in the world, and at that moment, it really was. "Come," he said, guiding me to a private room. "You're safe now. Both of you are." As we moved away from the reception, I heard the police station door open again. I turned instinctively, and my blood froze in my veins. Standing at the entrance, with disheveled hair and his face contorted in an expression I had never seen before, was Richard. "Eleanor!" he called, his voice strangely controlled, despite the obvious fury in his eyes. "What are you doing here?" Instinctively, I pulled Benjamin's stroller closer to me. Charles immediately positioned himself between us, his stance firm, his hand discreetly close to the gun in its holster. "Richard," my brother said, with a calm that didn't match the palpable tension in the environment, "good that you came. We were about to contact you." I saw confusion pass across Richard's face, quickly replaced by his usual mask of cordiality. But now I could see through it, could notice the small signs of falsity that had escaped me before. "Contact me? Why?" he asked, taking a step in our direction. Charles made a subtle gesture, and two officers who were at the reception approached, strategically positioning themselves near Richard. "We need to talk about some concerns that have arisen," Charles replied, his voice professional, almost impersonal. "Please, accompany me to the interrogation room." Richard looked at me, at the stroller with Benjamin, and then at the two officers who were now at his side. Understanding began to dawn on his face. "What is this about?" he asked, his voice still controlled, but with a tremor of anger. "Eleanor, what did you tell them?" At that moment, I felt something awaken inside me. It was no longer fear, no longer confusion or denial. It was a strength that I didn't know I possessed, the strength of a mother determined to protect her child. "The truth, Richard," I replied, looking him directly in the eyes for the first time. "Just the truth." His face changed then, the mask slipping completely. For a terrible instant, I saw the same look he directed at Benjamin during the baths, cold, full of contained rage. It was like looking at the face of a stranger. "You don't know what you're talking about," he hissed. "You're confused, tired. Let's go home. We can resolve this." He took another step in our direction, but the officers were faster. Each one held one of his arms, not with violence, but with enough firmness to make it clear that he wasn't going anywhere. "Richard August Parker," Charles said formally, "you are being detained for questioning under suspicion of child abuse. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say may be used against you in court." Richard's expression transformed into something I will never forget. It was a mixture of shock, anger, and, what disturbed me most, a kind of relief, as if a great pressure had finally been released. "You have no proof," he said, looking directly at me. "No one will believe you." It was Charles who responded, raising the camera I had handed to him. "Actually, Richard, we have all the proof we need right here." Richard paled, his eyes fixed on the small camera. "That's illegal," he said, his voice almost a whisper. "You can't film me without my consent." "That will be discussed with your attorney," Charles responded dryly. "For now, let's talk in the interrogation room." As the officers led Richard away, he looked at me one last time over his shoulder. There was no more anger in his eyes, just an emptiness that made me shudder. It was as if, now that the mask had completely fallen, there was nothing underneath. Charles guided me to a different room, more comfortable, with sofas instead of hard chairs. A female officer joined us, introducing herself as Detective Bernice. "I know this is an extremely difficult situation, ma'am," she said gently, "but we need your complete testimony while the events are still fresh in your memory." Nodding, I began to tell everything, from the beginning. The long baths, the marks I found, the changes in Benjamin's behavior, the sounds I heard through the door and by the radio, and finally, the decision to install the camera. As I spoke, Benjamin woke up in the stroller. I took him in my arms, gently cradling him. He looked around, confused by the unfamiliar environment, but didn't cry. He seemed to sense that something had changed, that he was safe. "Can I see the recordings now?" I asked after finishing my report. Charles and the detective exchanged looks. "I don't think it's good for you to watch this again," my brother replied. "It's evidence now. The specialists will analyze it." I want to see it, I insisted. I need to see with my own eyes, to be sure. After some hesitation, they agreed. A technician was called, and the images began to be displayed on a small monitor. It was as painful as the first time, perhaps even more so, because I was seeing it with other people present, because I was having my worst suspicion confirmed not just for me, but for the world. "It's enough," said Charles after a few minutes, making a gesture for the technician to turn off the monitor. "We have everything we need." Detective Bernice approached, her face showing a mixture of compassion and professionalism. "Mrs. Parker, we'll need a doctor to examine your son, to document any injury. It's standard procedure in these cases." I agreed immediately. Anything that could help keep Richard away from my son. While we waited for the doctor, Charles informed me about the next steps. Richard would be kept in custody during the investigation. A judge would be contacted to issue a protective order, preventing him from approaching me or Benjamin. The legal process would begin, with all its complexities. "Where will we stay?" I asked, suddenly aware that I couldn't go back home. Not to the home I shared with Richard, where every room now brought painful memories. "You can stay with me for now," Charles replied. "I have enough space, and then we'll see. The important thing is that you're safe now." The doctor arrived and gently examined Benjamin, documenting every mark, every evidence of what he had suffered. The baby, surprisingly, didn't cry during the examination. It was as if he sensed that this was necessary, that it was part of his path to safety. It was almost dawn when we finally left the police station. Charles took us to his apartment, and for the first time in weeks, perhaps months, I slept without fear. Benjamin was in the improvised crib next to my bed, and Charles stood guard in the living room, like the protector he always was. The next morning, I woke up with sunlight coming through the window. For a moment, I was disoriented, not knowing where I was. Then, the events of the previous night came back like a wave, and I immediately looked to the side, where Benjamin was still sleeping peacefully. I got up and went to the kitchen, where Charles was already preparing coffee. He looked tired, as if he hadn't slept much, but smiled when he saw me. "How are you?" he asked, serving a cup of coffee for me. "I don't know," I replied honestly. Relieved, scared, guilty, all at the same time. Guilty? Why? For not having noticed before, for not having protected my son from the beginning, for having believed the lie that was Richard. Charles put his hand over mine, his touch gentle but firm. "Don't do this to yourself, Eleanor. You had no way of knowing. Richard deceived everyone, not just you. And when you discovered the truth, you acted. That's what matters." His words helped, but the guilt didn't completely disappear. I thought it never would. It would be a weight I would carry forever, a constant reminder to always be vigilant, to always protect those I love. "And now?" I asked. "Now begins the hard part," Charles replied. "The legal process can be long. There will be testimonies, hearings, maybe a trial. But we are on the side of truth, and we have solid evidence. Richard won't escape what he did." That morning, I made the decision that would change the course of my life and Benjamin's. We wouldn't return to Springfield, at least not to live. There were too many memories there, too much pain. We needed a new beginning, in a place where no one knew us, where we could rebuild our lives away from Richard's shadow. Charles helped me find a small apartment in Lexington, not far from where he was stationed at the time. In the months that followed, while the case against Richard followed its slow course in the courts, we began our new life. I got a job in a fabric store similar to where I worked before, and slowly, very slowly, we began to heal our wounds. The legal process was exactly as Charles predicted: long, exhausting, at times humiliating. I had to relive every painful moment, answer invasive questions, face Richard's gaze across the courtroom. But the evidence was irrefutable. The recording left no doubt about what he had done. Richard was convicted, although the sentence was lighter than I expected. He didn't go to prison for very long. The judicial system at that time didn't treat child abuse with the seriousness it deserved, but it was enough to ensure he stayed away from us. And it was only then, when everything was over, that I fully understood the truth. Richard was never good to me out of love. He never hit me, not because he respected me, but because he was terrified of what my brother, the police officer, would do to him if he dared. He was a coward and took out all his evil on the only defenseless being in the house. My son. This revelation was bitter, but also liberating. It allowed me to finally cut the last threads of feeling that still tied me to that man, and move forward with my son, with our new life. And so began our long path to healing, in Lexington, away from the shadows of the past, but always protected by the man who had made a promise to a frightened girl many years before. My brother Charles, the silent protector who kept his word to the end. The first months in Lexington were difficult. Benjamin, even so small, seemed to carry the marks of what he had lived through. He woke up crying during the night, trembled when any man approached him, and took a good while until he felt comfortable in the bathtub again. Each reaction of his was like a knife in my heart, a constant reminder that I hadn't protected him as I should have. We lived in a small apartment, just one bedroom and living room, but it was our refuge. The yellowed walls, the creaking wooden floor, the window that didn't close properly when it rained, all of it, as simple as it was, represented our freedom, our new beginning. Charles visited us whenever he could. He brought presents for Benjamin, helped with expenses when money was tight, and gave me the emotional support I so desperately needed. Without him, I don't know if we would have managed to start over. "One day at a time, Eleanor," he would tell me when he saw me discouraged. "You're stronger than you think." Richard, serving his short sentence, tried to make contact several times. Letters, messages through mutual acquaintances, always with the same discourse that he was sorry, that he had changed, that he deserved a second chance. I never responded. For me, he had died the moment I saw that recording. Time passed. Benjamin began to walk, to talk, to develop his personality. He was a sweet, sensitive boy with a smile that lit up the room. Sometimes, when I looked at him playing, it was hard to believe what had happened, how close we had been to losing everything. The turning point in our lives didn't come suddenly, like lightning, but gradually, like the sun rising after a long, dark night. They were small changes, small victories, that little by little built our new reality. The first big step was when I got a promotion at the fabric store where I worked. From a simple attendant, I became the manager of the sewing and embroidery department. The better salary allowed us to move to a larger apartment in a nicer neighborhood of Lexington. Benjamin got his own room, decorated with toy cars and stars on the ceiling. Simple things, but which meant so much to us. I began taking a night course in administration at the technical school in the city. Benjamin stayed with a neighbor, Mrs. Elizabeth, a widowed lady who treated him like a grandson. Studying after so many years wasn't easy, but each page turned, each test completed was a step away from the past, toward a future I was building with my own hands. It was during this course that I met Lawrence, an accounting teacher. He was a widower, a few years older than me, with a calm and patient manner that soon captivated Benjamin. Our friendship began slowly, with conversations after classes, occasional coffees to discuss projects. It took me a long time to trust, to allow any man to approach me or my son again. One day, Lawrence invited me to dinner. I hesitated for days before finally accepting. I didn't know if I was ready for this, if I would ever be. Before the date, I went to visit Charles. "What do you think?" I asked, nervous. "Am I making a mistake?" My brother thought for a moment. "I can't answer that for you, Eleanor. But I can tell you that Lawrence seems to be a decent man. And you deserve to be happy." "I'm afraid," I confessed. "Not for me, but for Benjamin. What if I'm wrong again? What if I don't know how to judge a man's character?" Charles took my hands in his. You're not the same person you were when you met Richard. Now you know what to look for. You know when something isn't right. Besides, he added with a half-smile, I checked Lawrence's background. It's clean. That made me laugh, and the laugh was like a relief after so much tension. Of course Charles would have investigated Lawrence. It was his nature to protect, to ensure we were safe. The dinner took place in a small restaurant in downtown Lexington. It was a pleasant evening, without pressures or expectations. Lawrence was a good listener, had a subtle sense of humor, and didn't ask invasive questions about my past. When he left me at home, he limited himself to a kiss on the cheek and the hope we would see each other again. Our relationship grew slowly, with respect for my limits and Benjamin's. Lawrence never tried to replace the father figure. He knew that was delicate territory. Instead, he built his own relationship with my son, based on mutual trust and shared interests. He helped him with homework, taught him to play chess, took him fishing in the river on weekends. Charles, always vigilant, observed this approach with attentive eyes. But even he eventually surrendered to Lawrence's genuine goodness. I think this time you got it right, he told me after a family barbecue where Lawrence had participated. The definitive turning point came 2 years after meeting Lawrence. Richard had served his sentence and was free. I learned through acquaintances that he had returned to Springfield and was trying to resume his life. This news made me anxious, afraid that he would try to find us, to approach Benjamin. One night, Lawrence noticed my restlessness. We were sitting on the apartment's balcony. Benjamin was already asleep. "What's happening, Eleanor?" he asked. "You seem distant lately." I hesitated. I had never told him the whole story, just fragments, enough for him to understand that I was separated and that there had been problems in the past. Lawrence never pressed for more details, respecting my silence. But that night, something inside me said it was time to share everything, and so I did. I told him about Richard, about the baths, about the marks on Benjamin's body. I told him about the camera, about the nighttime escape to the police station, about the judicial process. As I spoke, the tears flowed freely down my face, but there was also a strange relief in sharing that burden. Lawrence listened in silence, his face passing through various emotions: shock, anger, sadness. When I finished, he just took my hand and squeezed it gently. "Thank you for trusting me with this," he said. "It must have been very difficult." There was no judgment in his voice, no excessive pity or empty promises that everything would be all right. Just understanding and respect for what Benjamin and I had been through. "I'm worried," I confessed. "Now that he's free, I'm afraid he'll try to find us." Lawrence was silent for a moment, as if carefully considering his next words. "Eleanor," he finally said, "you're not alone in this. I am here. Your brother is here, and there are legal measures we can take to ensure your safety and Benjamin's." The next morning, we went together to a lawyer. With his help, we managed to get a permanent restraining order against Richard. He could not approach us, contact us in any way, or even frequent the same places we usually went. It was also during this period that Lawrence made me an offer that would change our lives once more. "I'm thinking of opening my own accounting office," he said. "And I'd like you to be my partner." I was surprised. "Me? But I haven't even finished the course yet." "You have a natural talent for administration, Eleanor, and you have practical experience managing the department at the store. The diploma will come, but your knowledge is already there." It was a frightening and exciting proposal at the same time. It meant leaving the secure job at the store, risking our savings on a new business, trusting that it would work out. But it also meant independence, growth, the chance to build something of our own. I talked with Charles, who had been promoted to lieutenant and now worked in a special unit of the police force in Lexington. He supported me fully. "It will be good for you, Eleanor, and for Benjamin too, to see his mother building something from scratch." And so, we took another step in our journey of reconstruction. The office started small, in a rented room downtown. Lawrence took care of the technical part of accounting, while I managed the day-to-day, dealt with clients, organized the processes. It was hard work. There were difficult days, nights of worry about bills to pay, moments of doubt. But there were also victories. Each new client, each balance sheet successfully closed, each compliment received was a confirmation that we were on the right path. Benjamin, now 7 years old, observed everything with curious eyes. Sometimes, after school, he came to the office and did his homework at a small table we placed especially for him. He liked to help with small tasks, stapling documents, organizing folders, answering the phone occasionally. He was a smart boy, responsible beyond his years, and a constant source of pride. A year after opening the office, Lawrence asked me to marry him. It was a simple proposal during a picnic in the park, with Benjamin playing ball nearby. There was no expensive ring or grand gestures, just sincere words about building a life together. Before answering, I talked with Benjamin. He had the right to give his opinion, to express his feelings about having a new father. "What do you think about Uncle Lawrence?" I asked, trying to keep the conversation casual. Benjamin thought for a moment, with that seriousness that sometimes surprised me in someone so young. "He's cool," he finally replied. "He never yells, not even when I make mistakes in chess, and he makes you laugh, Mom." Those simple words, coming from a child who had seen the worst side of fatherhood, were the greatest endorsement I could receive. I accepted Lawrence's proposal, and we married in a small ceremony, just with family and close friends. Charles was our best man, and Benjamin carried the rings with immense pride. Our life began to take shape, to gain solidity. The office prospered. We expanded to a larger space, hired assistants. We bought a house in a residential neighborhood of Lexington, with a yard where Benjamin could play and a space for a garden that soon became my passion. It was in this house that we received the news that would definitively close a chapter of our past. Richard had moved to Maine, to work in a bank there. He was far away, no longer representing a threat. We could finally breathe without the constant weight of fear. Complete liberation, however, came from an unexpected place. Benjamin, now 10 years old, began to ask questions about his biological father. They were natural questions for a child of that age, but they filled me with anxiety. How to explain the truth without traumatizing him again? How to talk about the man who had hurt him when he was just a defenseless baby? Charles, always my safe harbor in emotional storms, advised me, "Be honest, but age-appropriate. He has the right to know, Eleanor. And it's better that it comes from you than from someone else." With the help of a child psychologist, I gradually approached the subject. I didn't go into graphic details, but made it clear that his biological father had hurt him as a baby, and that's why he was no longer part of our lives. Benjamin absorbed the information with surprising maturity. He asked questions, expressed confusion and sadness, but also an early understanding. "Is that why we moved here?" he asked. "Yes," I replied. "To start over, in a safe place." He was silent for a moment, thoughtful. "Uncle Charles helped, didn't he? That's why he's always around." "Yes, my son. Your Uncle Charles was our protector. He always kept the promise he made to me when we were children, that he would never let anything bad happen to me." Benjamin nodded, as if fitting pieces of a puzzle. "And Lawrence? He's different, isn't he? He'll never hurt me." "Never," I affirmed, with the certainty that only time and coexistence can give. "He loves you like a son." That conversation, difficult as it was, brought a new layer of healing to our lives. It was as if, by bringing the past to light, we had finally removed its power over us. Benjamin began to call Lawrence Dad, first hesitantly, then with growing naturalness, and Lawrence, with tears in his eyes the first time he heard it, hugged him with all the love a father can have. Our story of overcoming wasn't built in a single dramatic moment, but in thousands of small, courageous steps over the years. It was in the decision to install a camera that distant night, yes, but also in each morning that I got up, took care of my son, and moved forward. It was in the unwavering support of my brother, in Lawrence's patient kindness, in Benjamin's incredible resilience. And as I watched our family gathered around the dinner table, Benjamin animatedly telling about a school project, Lawrence listening with genuine attention, myself participating with a freedom I once thought I would never have again, I knew the turnaround was complete. We were no longer defined by what we had survived, but by what we had built from the ruins. The journey from victim to survivor, and from survivor to builder of a new life, was long and often painful. But each step was worth it, because it brought us here, to the peace we finally found, to the family we created, to the love we learned to trust again. Today, at 73, my life in Lexington is a testimony that there is always hope, even in the darkest moments. My little house, which is in a quiet neighborhood near downtown, is my refuge and my joy. It's not luxurious, but it has everything I need: a flowered garden in front, a cozy kitchen where I make my treats, and a porch where I have my coffee every morning, as I told you. Lawrence passed away 5 years ago from a sudden heart attack. It was a painful loss after almost 4 decades of a happy and peaceful marriage. Sometimes, when I'm preparing my coffee, I still expect to hear his footsteps in the kitchen, his calm way of saying, "Good morning, dear." But life goes on, and I carry with me the good memories, the love we shared, the years of true companionship. Benjamin, my boy, who is now a man of 49, lives in Louisville with his wife, Julia, and my 2 grandchildren, Tyler, 17, and Laura, 15. He graduated in law and works defending children and families in vulnerable situations. I think his childhood experiences, even those he doesn't consciously remember, shaped his desire to protect those who cannot defend themselves. It's an immense pride to see the man he has become: honest, loving, a present and dedicated father. When I observe his relationship with his children, the care and respect with which he treats them, I know that we managed to break the cycle. The painful past did not repeat itself. Instead, it transformed into a force for good. My grandchildren come to visit me almost every weekend. Tyler is a quiet, studious teenager who likes to help me with the garden and listen to my stories about the old days, as he says. Laura is a little hurricane of energy, always planning something, always with 1,000 ideas. She teaches me how to use my cell phone and laughs at my difficulties with technology, but has an infinite patience to explain everything again. My days have a simple and pleasant routine. I wake up early, prepare my coffee, and go to the porch to see the sunrise. Then I take care of the garden. I take special pride in my dahlias and sunflowers, which face the sun like little worshippers of the light. On Tuesday and Thursday mornings, I go to the neighborhood church's craft group, where we make items for charitable bazaars. It was there that I resumed crocheting, a skill I learned from my mother and that now gives me so much pleasure and tranquility. In the afternoons, when I'm not crocheting to sell at the fair or to give as a gift to someone, I like to cook. I make sweets and cakes using my mother's recipes, some so old they are yellowed with time. The smell of cinnamon and cloves filling the house brings me back to my childhood in Springfield, to the good moments before everything that happened. Charles, my dear brother and protector, retired from the police force as a captain. He lives just a few blocks from here and visits me almost daily. At 77, he still maintains the straight posture and attentive gaze of a police officer, but his eyes have become softer with time. He never married. He says his mission in life was to take care of his baby sister and his nephew, and that this occupied his entire heart. I don't believe that, of course. I think that his work in the police, especially after he was transferred to a unit that dealt with crimes against children, absorbed so much of him that there wasn't space left to build his own family. But he never complains. He says he's happy with the choices he made, with the impact he had on the lives of so many families throughout his career. When Charles comes to visit, we sit on the porch, have coffee, and talk about everything and nothing. Sometimes we remember our childhood, our parents, our brothers, the simple games of that time. We laugh about the mischief we did, the times he defended me from bullies at school. Other times we talk about the present, the grandchildren, the garden, neighborhood news. and rarely, very rarely, we talk about those difficult days we faced together. Richard became a distant ghost in our lives. We learned many years ago that he remarried in Maine, had other children. I don't know if he changed, if he found some redemption. It's not something that concerns me anymore. I learned that I can't control the actions of others, only my own. And I chose to move forward without the weight of hatred or bitterness. The marks of that time are still in me, of course. There are moments when a sudden noise startles me, when a door closing with force makes me jump. Sometimes, when I see cases of mistreated children on television, I feel that old pain resurface. But I don't let these marks define me or limit my capacity to feel joy. One of the greatest blessings of recent years was reconnecting with the community. For a long time after the events with Richard, I lived isolated, afraid to trust, to open myself to new friendships. But gradually, especially after the grandchildren were born and I moved to this house, I began to get more involved with the neighbors, with the church group, with the ladies at the fair where I sell my crochet work. Mrs. Harriet, my 81-year-old neighbor, has become a dear friend. She lives alone, like me, and we exchange little meals over the fence that separates our houses. She makes a meatloaf with gravy that's delicious, and I reciprocate with my orange cake with syrup. On Sunday afternoons, when neither of us has a family visit, we play cards on my porch, betting pennies that we never collect from each other. Mr. Harold, a widowed gentleman of 75 who sells vegetables at the farmer's market, always sets aside the best carrots and beets for me. For you to make that soup that feeds the soul, he says with a gentle smile. It's not romance. We're just two elderly people who found comfort in friendship, in the mutual care that people our age understand so well. The neighborhood children like to stop by my house after school for homemade cookies. They sit on the porch steps, tell me about their day, about their teachers and classmates. I listen to each story with attention, knowing how important it is for a child to feel that their voice matters, that someone is interested in what they have to say. Looking back, I see how long the journey was that brought me here. From the dreamy girl of Springfield to the tranquil elderly woman of Lexington, I passed through dark valleys and luminous mountains. I knew the worst of human cruelty, but also the purest kindness. I learned that life gives us no guarantees, only possibilities, and that it's up to us to choose what to do with them. If there's a lesson I would like to leave for those who hear me, it's that it's never too late to start over. I had to reinvent my life at 24, as a single mother of a traumatized baby, in a new city, without money or clear prospects. It was frightening, and many times I thought I wouldn't make it. But each small step, each small victory, took me a little further from the abyss. Today, when I wake up and see the birds in the garden I planted with my own hands, when I receive the tight hugs from my grandchildren, when I smell the cake baking in the oven, I know it was worth it. Every tear, every sleepless night, every moment of doubt, it was all worth it to get here. Life taught me that our story isn't defined by the moments we fall, but by how we get up afterward. That the most powerful strength isn't the one that destroys, but the one that rebuilds. And that, even in the darkest nights, there is always a light. Sometimes it's just a small flame of hope inside us, but if we protect it and feed it, it can grow and illuminate not only our path, but also that of others who need to find a way out of the darkness. That's how I survived. That's how I won. And that's how I live today, grateful for each morning, for each cup of coffee on the porch, for each flower that blooms in my garden. Grateful for having had the chance to see my son grow up safely, to meet my grandchildren, to experience a true and generous love with Lawrence, and mainly grateful for having learned that no matter how broken we are, it's always possible to collect the pieces and build something new and beautiful with them. My dear friends who have followed me to this point, I've shared with you one of the most difficult stories of my life, showing scars that I often hide even from myself. If you are living in an abusive situation, know that you are not alone. It may seem like no one will believe you, that there's no way out. I felt that way too. But there are people willing to help. There are paths to freedom. Abuse is never the victim's fault. The only person responsible is the abuser. The signs are often subtle, and the abuser actively works to hide them. Richard maintained a perfect public image. Only in the most private moments did his true nature reveal itself. When we suspect something is wrong, we try to deny it because the truth is too painful. But there comes a moment when we can no longer run away. For me, it was when I heard those sounds over the radio and saw the marks on my son's body. If you're looking for courage, you don't need to do everything at once. Small steps are important. Saving money little by little, making a plan, seeking support. When I fled that night with my baby, I had only the essentials and the certainty that my brother would be there. It was enough to begin. Don't underestimate the power of a single trusted ally. For me, it was Charles. For you, it might be a family member, friend, neighbor, or professional. If you don't have that support nearby, there are organizations in every state dedicated to helping victims of abuse. The recovery path isn't linear. There are ups and downs, good days and bad. Healing comes in many forms. For me, it came through work, through raising my son, through Lawrence's love, and through the community I built. It also came from breaking the silence and sharing my story. Today, at 73, I am stronger than the trauma I suffered. I chose not to let it define my life. When I see Benjamin with his own children, treating them with love and respect, I know we broke the cycle of abuse. This is our greatest victory. If you've lived through something similar, know this. It's possible to rebuild, no matter how broken you feel. It won't be easy or quick, but it's possible. From the frightened girl of Springfield to the serene grandmother of Lexington, I survived storms I thought would destroy me. And if you know someone who might be suffering abuse, be present. Sometimes, all a person needs is someone who believes them. Abuse thrives in silence. When we break that silence, we undo its power over us. My dear viewers, if my words touched your heart, please subscribe to the channel and hit that notification bell. Each subscription helps this message reach more people who need to hear that there is hope. Also, leave a comment with the word protection so I know you made it to the end of this difficult story. Do it now, don't wait. Each person we reach can mean a family saved, a child protected, a life transformed. God bless and protect you all. Until our next meeting, with more stories from this grandma who learned that life always offers us a new chance to bloom.